me as a individual staff member at this particular school, yeah, sure, there are a lot of times, or I would say maybe more times in the past, when I've thought, well, gosh, this child is, 8 or 9 or 10, and their reading isn't really that good, from what I can tell anyway. And gosh, is that a problem?
He's my youngest brother. I know that he's always been here in the school because I know that 3 days before the school had start, he was born. So I know that these days he's 7 years old and he's learning how to read. He can count like to 10, 20 or whatever, I don't know, I've lost track, and I don't think you need to be taught it, and most of the time, like with maths, I know that they want to buy lollies or whatever it is, and yeah, I just don't think you need to be taught it.
We have children in our community, who come into our school very young, at very young ages, and, they don't know how to read. They're 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever, and they don't know how to read, or they're just learning how to read, or their reading's not that good, or whatever. And it's almost like you're giving up on the child by saying, oh my God, the child's 6 or 7, they don't know how to read, they're going to be a failure in life. But, it's interesting, they come into our environment, or our community, where they really, there's a lot of, you walk around our school and there are a lot of things, a lot of printed things on the walls, And why, it's almost like, well, why wouldn't a child be curious maybe in what some of these these things are? And also the fact that, wow, there are other kids at this school who look at that piece of paper and they get something from it. They now know something that they didn't know before. They didn't know about a class that was going on, and now they do. They didn't know that there's going to be a field trip on Friday, and now they do. They didn't know that they have to pay a fine to the committee, and now they do. They didn't know that, there's a group of people who are interested in cooking, who want to have a meeting, but now they do. So these kids, these younger kids, they look at these other kids and they say, wow, those older kids have this skill. It's called reading. I don't have that skill, but I want to have that skill. And so that motivation to have the skill pushes them to learn how to read.
My little brother has been in the school since the beginning of the 1st grade. He knows how to read in English. He knows math.
He knows how to read in Hebrew too?
And how to read in Hebrew, because it's just something that it's hard not to come across it eventually.
There's just so much for the very basic stuff that is really relevant to every person, such as reading. It's relevant because it's present in everything you do. And so it's impossible not to realize the value of it. And it's impossible not to, at some point, want to read.
And I think that those 3 things, writing and reading and basic mathematics, are so necessary to being a part of our community that kids pick those things up at some point in some way.
We've heard from other schools that it's pretty persistent, and that that children don't usually go on without knowing how to read for very long.
What did you observe with other children about learning how to read and write? How do they do it? Do all of them actually do it, or?
All of them do it. I don't know how. I don't know. I really don't know anything about how they do it. But I don't know anyone who didn't.
How do kids learn how to read when they don't learn it in classes?
We have no idea, I can tell you.
They come in not knowing how to read,
yeah,
then a year later suddenly...
There's about 5 students that came the beginning of the 1st year, didn't know how to read, and now they know how to read. We have no idea how or when they learned how to read, but they learned how to read, so we're leaving them alone.
Do they know how they learned to read?
I don't know.
They might.
We don't.
It's nobody's business to ask them, usually.
They're content, so why get in their way?
I think you don't need to learn it right away. Some kids can learn it in school. Some kids can learn it by trying to read books. Some kids kids can learn it in all different ways. And me, I learned on the internet because I would always go on one website and I could never read anything. And people would always send me stuff and I couldn't read it, so I always tried reading it. And then that's how I learned how to read. And there's lots of different ways, and it proves you can learn any way you want. And I go on the computer a lot, and I'm really good with computers. And I didn't get taught any of that stuff. I didn't take a computer class or a reading class.
There's a phrase called peer group pressure that people always say, well, children learn, taking drugs from peer group pressure. Well, they also, it works both ways. My 6-year-old sees all these other people around reading, including myself, and she believes she's interested in her own success. She believes that reading is something she needs to be successful in life. That's, she watches other people, just like walking and talking were something where we didn't have to tell her how to do that. She's the same thing's happening with reading.
So I personally don't worry about, people learning the basic skills, reading and writing and mathematics, because in our environment, those 3 things by themselves are very valuable. And those 3 things will enable you to do things that you couldn't do before.
She has learned reading, by picking up, early reader books, and by asking us to help her, but also from watching commercials on TV, and from just and from her friends. Her friends say, "Oh, I know how to read this," and she's like, "Well, I want to learn how to read that." And also the computer. That was the other thing. She uses a lot of the computer games, and they have words. A lot of them, most of them are have some sort of educational thing, especially for the younger children. That's something that they build into them to make them more, marketable. And so, between all of those things, I would say she's right where she would be if she was in a traditional school.